Thank you. Thank you. Wow, so much. Well, welcome, everybody. Thank you. Awesome. As you just heard, my name is Gustaf Fjelstrom, and no, I was not a foreign exchange student. I actually went through an entire year of high school, and at the parent-teacher night, the teacher was surprised to meet my parents because I thought I wasn't a foreign exchange student because I didn't talk much in school. But anyway, I am a freelance motion designer, creative director in the Austin, Texas area, but that's by way of a whole other career out in Silicon Valley, where I was in the digital agency world. I sort of grew up in that world, and then made the switch to freelance about 6 years ago. So now I'm concentrating on conceptual style frames, storyboards, style frame storyboards, and animation for various projects. So if you're unfamiliar with my work, let's take a quick look at my slightly updated reel for 2025. So here we go. Thank you. And yes, my studio is that neat and tidy 100% of the time, all the time, every day. So just, no, not really. All right, so where we left off. If you were here last year, you may have seen a presentation that I gave on my work in progress on the Book of Daniel that I did for Pixel Preacher. And back then I was very much right in the middle of the project, so I did like all the ideation, the storyboard, style frame, and I got as far as the style frame. So happy to report that the project is done now. So this was the latest in collaboration with my friends over at Pixel Preacher. And they make high quality assets for churches and other organizations who couldn't necessarily have access to those kinds of assets. And they're just been a really great partner to work with, and so happy to present this here. So with your permission, we'll take a look at the finished product here. So this was done entirely by me in Cinema 4D and Redshift and Red Giant and all the Maxon One tools. So let's take a quick look at that right now. All right. Thank you. So today we're going to learn how to survive a lion's den or a fiery furnace. And by that I mean some not so secret tips and techniques with Maxon One. So as I pointed out, I pretty much use the entire suite of Maxon One for this. So that's everything from Zbrush for digital sculpting, Cinema 4D for all the animations and the simulations, Redshift for all the rendering, and then Red Giant for all of my compositing. So that pretty much covers most of Maxon One. And in the past, I've kind of taken one scene and kind of gone through a whole entire thing. But this year we're doing something a little different, but I got some good news and some bad news. So the good news is it's a choose your own adventure. Bad news is yesterday had first crack, so they got to choose. So I got to do the ones that are left over, so I'm sorry, but that's it. But if we have time, maybe we can get to all of them. So, but for each of these, they are highlighting just something a little bit different in some of the techniques that I use. So for scene one here, we're going to look at some sculpting, some cloth simulation, some particles, and then an in-depth look at the comping with Red Giant and Redshift. Yesterday we looked at some IK rigging, so if there's time, maybe we can do that. We also looked at some rigid body dynamics for the destruction. Again, if there's time, or afterwards, I'm hanging out at the demo booth for an hour. We can go over it then. But we'll take a look at our fiery furnace scene, where we can look at some more sculpting, as well as some of the character rig stuff that I use to animate these characters, as well as some particles, and then of course some more comping. So let's dive into scene number one here, which is the unveiling. So actually, this scene kind of I put it in a little bit later it came about later in the process because I realized I needed some kind of expository element to kind of introduce our setting, introduce our scene, and the concept behind how I was portraying this piece was all taking place in this sort of miniature puppet theater where all these characters are made out of wood. So I needed some way to introduce that. So I had this idea of panning down from the city and then tracking into our theater as we have this reveal of this blanket coming off and all this dust flying about. So that's where we ended up. So again, we're going to look at some sculpting, some cloth sims. I will do a demo on that, and we'll take a look at some of the particle work, and then we'll dive into the comping. So just wanted to show a little bit of the process time lapse on the theater. So this is just roughing out some geometry in Cinema 4D and just trying to get it into the ballpark and just kind of coming up with something that just felt right for this particular theater. So just kind of freestyling in cinema. Didn't really have a plan. I had a little bit of reference, but just kind of freestyling and then just making sure it felt right. And then I'm just progressively adding more and more detail. And then I'm adding in some of these kit bash elements. And then just keep adding more and more detail until it felt right to me. And then I took all that geometry and just sort of baked it down and exported it out into Zbrush, where in this case there wasn't a whole lot of sculpting, but there was a lot of detailing. So in a sec here, we're going to go over to Zbrush, and boom, now we're in Zbrush. So here I was adding just a lot of wood texture and just getting in some really fine high-frequency detail. And then here I am doing some poly painting just so I can get a rough pass at a diffuse layer to use in my color. And then creating some UV maps to bring those over back into Redshift to use as displacement so I can get all this high-level detail in my Redshift but still have some low poly geometry. So that's just a quick test render of the theater. So for the demo, I want to show you some of the cloth particles the cloth simulations that I created for this piece. So again, the basic idea was to have this theater revealed by like pulling off this blanket and have this nice dust fly around. So first part was getting the cloth done. And I will point out that this file I split into like 3 or 4 different files for the final render because I had the background element with the city and all those buildings and trees and everything. It was its own file. This is a separate file. I had a foreground pass. just because I wanted to concentrate on all these simulations without having to render the background again and again. So just to look at the anatomy of this scene here real quick, we've got just literally nothing else in the scene other than my lights, and then we've got our theater, and we've got some candles here and some BBDs for our flames, and then I thought it would be fun to put in all these little Easter eggs from some of the characters that we'll meet later in the piece, so that's what I did there. So when coming up with a simulation like this, or trying to figure out how to do it, I try to start as simply as possible and then just keep progressively adding more and more detail. So we're going to do that today, or at least the initial stages of that. So for this cloth, we're going to start off with just a cube, and this is going to be just representative of our theater. So let me turn off my work plane here. And we're going to need some cloth. So let's just grab a plane. Boom, right there. And I'm going to move this above our placeholder theater. And for cloth, it's very simple. Just right-click, simulation tags, cloth. And because we need it to collide with our cube, we're going to do right-click, simulation tags. There we go. Oops, simulation tags, collider. So right off the bat, we're going to get some really excellent, beautiful results. Not exactly what we were looking for, though, so let's tweak a few things, and we'll take a look at that. So you can see we've got very low subdivisions on our plane. So first, let's bump those up. We'll just go 100 by 100. And here we go. Cool. But we're getting these intersections here with our cube. So I'm going to go in my project settings and our simulation tag, and or our simulation settings. I'm going to just bump up my substeps and my iterations just a little bit. And now if we run that simulation, we're going to get much more detailed cloth and no intersections. So cool. Step one. How then do we get our cloth to start in this position? Because we can't start our scene with the cloth flying up in the air. So I'm going to give myself more runway in my timeline. I'm going to let this settle and wait for a good starting point. And for today, right about there will work. So if you go on your cloth tag, you can go to the dresser tab, and there's a button for initial state. So I'm going to set my initial state, and that, oddly enough, sets the initial state. So now if I go back to my beginning and I re-enable my simulation, we're now still a live cloth simulation, but that is the starting position for our cloth. And you can see if I put in a wind force there, and I rotate that this way, and I move it in here. Let's just bump that up a little bit. Get a little bit of turbulence in there. You'll see that it's still a live cloth simulation, but now that's its initial state. So, cool, we got that. So how do we now manipulate this cloth so we can reveal our theater? How do we manipulate the cloth there? So there's many different ways you could do that, but I am going to show you the way that I came up with for my particular purpose, and that was creating another piece of geometry. I'm going to set this to there. I'm going to move this back. I'm going to shrink this down quite a bit. And for this, we don't need super high segments. I just need to get a little piece of geometry that's going to grab onto our cloth here. So if I go to viewing our segments, I'm going to do 5 width segments and 1 height segment. So cool. So in order for this to interact with our cloth, this also needs to be cloth. So I'm going to go simulation tags, cloth. But I need to check a couple things here. So for mix animation, I'm going to say with pins, which is going to exclude this from any forces or gravity or anything, but it's going to enable us to interact with the cloth. And to do that, I need to have one more tag on here, and that is the constraint tag. or excuse me, connector tag. Constraints are later. All right, so here we are, and we can, so this will look at our vertices, and it'll make connections within certain tolerances that we set. So for instance, I'm going to set a search radius of 5 centimeters, and I only need 2 connections per vertex. So if I do that, you can see now that I've created these connections that are hooking onto the cloth. And then one more setting, I'm going to set my target length for those connections to 0. So now if we go forward, you can see this sort of scrunches up, and now it's grabbed onto that cloth. So what that means now is that I can manipulate this cloth just by moving this piece of geometry. So I'm going to continue playing, and let's just grab our other piece of geometry here. So now that cloth will react when I move that piece of geometry. And that is exactly how I did that in my theater here. So if I go back to our theater, and you can see here, there's that geometry that really just pulls that cloth off. So that really let me just really art direct how fast I wanted that cloth to reveal and where that cloth was going. So that was the principle there. So from getting from that cube to the theater, it was just a matter of setting up some geometry around my theater, because I didn't want to have to worry about all these calculations and then setting up my collisions on my cloth there. And that was it for the cloth there. So let's switch gears to talking a little bit about the particles. So this was in a separate file because I wanted to render my particles separately so that I could composite them with more control in After Effects. And we'll take a look at that here in a minute. But here I have some particles that I've spawned onto our blanket, and this is just an alembic export of the cloth simulation. But I have some particles that are spawned onto the blanket, and then as the blanket gets pulled off, these particles fling out into the air. And I just thought that was a super cool way of showing all these particles in there, because I love putting dust in everything. You'll see. So how did we achieve this? So again, using our drastically simplified method, I have a simple particle fling setup here. Now let me just turn off my modifiers there. So I have a mesh emitter that is set to emit on this cube, and then I have one particle group here. This will be our stuck group. So just at default, it's going to spawn our particles, but they're not stuck to anything because I don't have any modifiers on them. And let me bump those up just a little bit. So we're going to go to our emitter. We're going to bump up to 1,000 particles. And in our group here, we're going to make these 3, so we see a bigger. Okay. So yeah, they get born, but they're not stuck anywhere. I don't have any motion. There's no other motion in the scene that's going to affect those particles. So they're just staying exactly where they were born. So using these modifiers in the particles, there is one called stick. So I put that in that stuck particle group, and I tell it to stick to the cube. So now when I spawn those particles, they're going to be stuck to that cube. So no matter where that cube goes, those particles are going to go with it. So to get these unstuck, I'm using a condition. So in this particle group, I have this condition here, and the condition is based on velocity. So you can do conditions on really virtually any property. I just chose velocity because I wanted them to fling off when they reach a certain speed. So I have a condition for velocity, and if it's greater than 150 centimeters, then the action will be taken. So you can see in this condition here, I have this action for switching groups. So what this is going to do is, when it meets that condition, it's going to switch the group and move all of those particles into this second particle group that I have. This is the free group. And I have this free group colored red, and I just have it bumped up a little bit so we can see it. So now if we enable that, you can see as soon as those particles reach that speed threshold, they'll automatically switch groups. And you'll see they're not switching all at the same time. It's the outer ones because those are spinning faster. So that works to my favor there. So to finish off this little simulation, we need another modifier. And this kind of threw me for a loop because I was looking for an unstick modifier, but it's actually another stick modifier, and in that, you have it set to unstick. So now it's just going to release those particles from being stuck to that cube, and now I can put in like another turbulence here just to give me some motion with those particles. So now they are, when they reach that speed, they get flung off, and that is the basic concept of how the particles in my main animation here are being activated. So yeah, so it's just the same principles. It's whenever that cloth or those particles reach a certain speed, I have it set so that they'll fling off, and there we go. Cool, so we looked at sculpting, we looked at some cloth simulations, we looked at some particles. Now let's dive into some comping, which is probably one of my favorite parts of the scene, or of the process, is just once I've got my image, I've got it all rendered, and just kind of playing with it and fine-tuning it. So I'll take you through a quick anatomy of this comp, and I'll point out some of the Red Giant heroes that I use on pretty much everything. So I'm going to turn off my color correction here. I'm going to turn off all of my comps here and kind of build this back up. So as I mentioned, I rendered this in a couple different passes. So here's my background pass. It's just my cityscape and trees and a background plate and a sky. And then I also have a volume pass on here, which is all my smoke and fog and my atmospheric effects. And then because that's my background, I have it separated with some depth of field, just a little bit of blur for the background, and then some exposure so I can just knock that background back. And then I have, I'm usually compositing in at least a couple layers of some practical elements. So like here's some atmospheric smoke, that's real smoke that was shot that I purchased a long time ago. And I keep reusing these same assets in lots of different projects. There's that. And then let's get to back to our theater. So here's our theater, and it's literally just our theater on an empty layer, so that I can composite it onto our background, because those files had the very same camera move between them, so I didn't change a thing on there. So yeah, here we go. So then I have, let's dive into that comp. So I'll also point out that I'm working with 32-bit linear EXRs in an ASUS color profile. And I've demoed a couple times working in ASUS, but I'm not going to dive too much into that today. But I'm just going to point out a few things here. So working with EXR files, I'm able to render even though I have multiple passes, in a single pass, I can include different AOVs in Redshift, which are different aspects of that render. So for instance, on my theater here, I have a beauty pass, which is basically everything as it would appear as I rendered it. I have a depth pass, which is the depth information that I can use. I've got a puzzle mat, which just helps me isolate certain things for color correction purposes. I actually got 2 puzzle mats in there just because I wanted to pull a couple different keys. You could also do cryptomat, but I'm a fan of using puzzle mats just because I try to keep it simple. And then I have a couple of lighting groups that I set up in Redshift. So in Redshift, you can set up light groups to isolate certain lights and export those out to AOVs. So I have one lighting group here for my flames, which were from my little candles, and then another lighting group from my spotlight, which kind of comes here at the end. We'll demo that here in a sec. So I'm going to set that back to beauty. I'm going to go back to my main comp here. And you see the advantage of being able to separate out those AOVs into separate passes is now I have lots of control of how I'm compositing those in After Effects. So for instance, here is my spotlight. You can see that comes in, and I can now, because that's its own pass that I'm just compositing on top in After Effects, I can double that up or even add an exposure to that. So let's go add, let's do color correction, do exposure. And if I really wanted to accentuate that spotlight, I can just bump it up quite a few. And without having to go back into Cinema 4D and then render that again with more intensity in that light, I can control that in the comp. I mean, within reason. I mean, there's some stuff you want to go back and fix and do it right, but that's just one of the tricks I like to use. And then similarly with my flames, I have these flames on their own layer, so I can control their intensity. I can have a glow on them that really punches things up. So yeah, just those Redshift AOVs just make compositing so much more flexible and more fun, quite frankly, for me. So, and then I have a layer of my blanket dust here. Let's go back here. Let me punch up my exposure just so we can really see those coming in. And then some environment dust, because I really love adding dust into everything. So, all right. Let's go back to reset that. Okay, cool. So that is my basic composite. So once I have all of my elements together, then I'll go in and I'll start really dialing in the look of that image. So the first Red Giant shout out will be for real lens flare. So I needed some flares for our setting sun, or I haven't figured out if this is setting sun or rising sun. It could be either. But let's just say it's setting sun. So yeah, Red Giant real lens flares, really great. It's got a really flexible designer program where you can come in and just customize your lens to exactly how you want it. I think I just started with a basic sun flare and then just kind of tweaked a few things. So yeah, that's the first Red Giant shout out, is for real lens flares. All right, and then last, one more layer of some practical smoke here, just to give me some realistic atmosphere in the piece. Okay, that's fine. All right, so let's talk about some of the color correction that I'm doing. So once I have my basic composite, I'll go in and first do a path of some color correction, and that is giving my exposures in place. And I'm a big fan of using the Lumetri scopes to dial things in, so maybe that'll populate here, we'll see. But just to make sure that I'm not overexposing things, and that's one of the great advantages of working in ACES, is that with my 32-bit ACES output, I've got a really wide dynamic range, and I've got a lot of control over that in comp because I'm using ACES. And to just demo that real quickly here, I'm just going to add an adjustment layer. And I'm going to add another exposure here. Color correction, exposure. So not that I would want to do this in a comp setting, but if I were to bump this up 5 stops, I'm still not blowing out this image because the ACES transform has a very efficient color mapping and roll off at the top. So you can see here, even though I'm going up 5 stops, I'm still not clipping my image. So yeah, I can't go back to just compositing like normal sRGB images for final renders. But yeah, so another ACES for the win. Okay, second Red Giant shout out is optical glow. So let's go back to sort of where we see our candles. All right. And how I'm using optical glow is to give me some of that bloom from our hottest parts of the image. So you can see definitely here on our candle flames, that's we're sort of blooming out. And of course you have the bloom in Redshift, which you could render out as well. But I find doing that and having that baked into my render leads to less flexibility on the comping side. So I'd much rather do that in comp. And then with optical glow, I have much more control over how that glow looks. So I'm a huge fan of adding in this sort of diffusion and any sort of glows or anything, especially when there's practical lights that are visible in the scene. All right, and then on top of that, I'm usually adding in just some plain old After Effects vanilla glow just to kind of further enhance that. And I just, this one is very subtle, but it just gives me a little more sort of volumetric bloom in the scene. So our third Red Giant shout out will be to Magic Bullet Looks. And this is my primary go-to tool for dialing in a color grade. So once I have everything sort of corrected to where I want it, and then just getting in here and being really creative and really finessing the look of this shot. So let's see. Let me open up Magic Bullet Looks. So if you're not familiar with Magic Bullet Looks, it's a tool that has all of these other tools sort of built in here. So they're all sort of based in the world of cinematography. So we've got exposure, contrast, gradient exposures, and a bunch of camera effects like optical diffusion, lens distortions, color correction nodes, and then film nodes. So very much in the world of cinematography, which I really love because that's also part of my background. And so in my case here, for each project, I'm kind of dialing in a specific recipe, and then I'll save that as a preset, and then I'm able to go in and tweak that on a per shot basis. So this is our baseline of where we're starting. And what you'll find here is that I am adding all of these tools to kind of subtly degrade the image a little bit, to add in some imperfection. Because when you're rendering out of cinema, I mean, it's super clean, super pristine, and that's great if that's what you need. But for this, I needed something that was a little more organic, little more imperfect. Because even though my work isn't necessarily photorealistic, I do like imparting a photographic quality to the images. And so for that, Magic Bullet Looks is really great. So starting here with some more optical diffusion, and this is similar to a glow, and actually this is very subtle, and that's the other thing too. With these, like, subtlety is like the name of the game. But optical diffusion is a phenomenon that happens when you're shooting, with a camera. Light enters the lens and could possibly bounce around in the lens and then bleed into your other areas of the shot. So that just gives me a little more warmth and so just sort of blooming my highlights a little bit more. Second would be lens distortion. So that's just giving me a little bit of warping around the edges. Very subtle, but I think it helps, especially when there's a moving camera. Again, simulating some lens imperfections. Next in that line would be lens vignetting, which I'm addicted to because just darkening the edges of our frame just to kind of focus our attention in. And then that with chromatic aberration. And that one also very subtle, but I'm going to zoom way in here to show you what that really looks like. So chromatic aberration, okay, there we go. There's our buddy. Is a slight separation of the color channels as you get closer to the edges of the frame. And again, that's another lens thing that happens because the light doesn't refract evenly across the lens. So that's just another lens artifact that I'm introducing just to give me a little bit of something in that image. And again, it's not something that you can say, oh, look at that. It's just something that all of these subtleties add up, and they, in my opinion, add up to more than the sum of their parts. Another super subtle one is halation, which was added last year in Magic Bullet Looks, which is a property of film in that it's sort of the highlights, your super bright highlights kind of tend to eat out into the image as well. So it's a little more bloom, just a little something else in there. So just, again, subtlety. And then I'm usually adding in a layer of clarity in here just to kind of crisp up all those details. And then I have that as just one preset that I apply to most of my shots, and then I can dial them in on a shot-by-shot basis. And that's really just scratching the surface of all of the other tools that are available in Magic Bullet Looks. And it's like one of my absolute favorite tools, and it goes on everything. So there we go. All right, we don't need to save that. All right, so now we've got our Magic Bullet Looks. And then depending on the shot, I'll add in some sharpening here, just like very subtly. I've got this at like 25% or whatever. And then the next hero for Red Giant is Renoiser. So when I'm compositing a few different passes, some practical effects, and then anything else that I have in that scene, all of those sources are going to have their own sort of grain structure. And it might be hard to see here in our context here, but just slightly different grain from one element to the next. And so to unify that, I'm using Magic Bullet or excuse me, Red Giant Renoiser. And what this does is apply a consistent level of grain across your entire image. And you've got lots of control over how much grain, like you can, bump it up to make it really grainy if you want, and you've got control over the size and the softness, but again, subtlety is the name of the game here. So, and what this helps with is just unifying that grain structure. So again, all of these things adding up just, I think, adds up to more than the sum of their parts, in my opinion. So, okay, last but not least, as far as Red Giant goes, is Colorista. Colorista is my go-to tool for just overall image correction, color correction. It's a very powerful color correction tool. For your everything from color balance to temperature to exposure. And a lot of times I'll save this for my final step where I'll render out all my shots from After Effects and then bring them into Premiere for my final edit. And then from there I'll do a final pass at color correction to make sure everything is lined up and looking consistent from shot to shot. And Red Giant Colorista is definitely my go-to for that. So. Cool. That's it for our theater scene. So we can go back to our presentation. So yesterday we looked at our little head opening there. So if there's time, maybe we can come back to it. But I'm going to jump to scene D here, if I can remember which one it is. And we're going to look at some of the character tools that I used in this one. So yes, our fiery furnace. And full disclosure, I wish I could talk about the fire, but the flames themselves were created in another program, so I won't mention what that was. But I did bring them in as VBDs into Cinema 4D, so everything is rendered in this scene. But I am not a character animator at all, but was able to get away with this scene because of a few things here. So. Again, to recap, we're going to look at some sculpting. We're going to look at the character rig. We're going to look at some more particles, and then if there's time, we'll look at some comping again, but it's the same principles that we just looked at. So for my characters here, again, I'm not a character animator at all, but my background is in illustration, so any chance that I can use drawing to figure out a problem, I'll definitely take it. So here I am just sort of freestyling. Like I had this vague idea of what I wanted these characters to look like. And here I'm just freestyling, just having fun, just kind of brainstorming how these guys could come to life. And again, the whole concept was like everything in our shots were like these little puppet kind of wooden things. So I wanted to have, stylized figures that kind of looked, plausible as like puppets that come to life. So Zbrush here definitely fit the bill for that. And just a note about incorporating Zbrush into my workflow. So happy that I did. I put it off for so long, but since it's been included in Maxon One, I didn't have any more excuses for not using it. But in my 3D work, previous to using Zbrush, I was very much at the mercy of whatever assets I could find or modify to use in the stories that I wanted to tell. And in the case of this project, I needed some very, very specific assets that I wasn't going to be able to find, so I knew I was going to have to create them myself. Otherwise, I'd just be, making things much more difficult for myself. So, taking the time to learn ZBrush and incorporate it into my workflow. I mean, I'm still learning it, but it's definitely proved very advantageous. So, here's just a couple of test renders of these fully textured up. So yes, ZBrush for Maxon One there. Okay, let's go back to Cinema 4D. We can close up our theater, close up our cloth. All right, close with him. And let's open up our scene for the fiery furnace. Cool. All right, yeah, I don't need that plugin right now. That's fine. All right, so here is the shot for the fiery furnace minus the fire. And again, I am not a character animator, but I was able to just take my character, go to Mixamo, get a walk cycle, and then using the Cinema 4D character rig, I was able to dial in exactly the animation that I wanted to on top of the Mixamo animation. So again, let's just real quick show you the anatomy of the scene here. Let me turn on the fire. I'm a huge fan of using layers to control the functionality of my scenes here. So again, there's nothing in the scene except for a floor, a backdrop, my props for all of my scene dressing there, and then a couple of giant VBDs for the fire. And if you're wondering how I'm flying around the scene like this, 3D Space Mouse. Can't say enough good things about that, so it's super fun. All right, so that's the scene. So let's talk about the character stuff. All right, so for that, I'm gonna enlist the help of my good buddy here. So here is, I think this is Shadrach from the text. So all right, so here's just a simple walk cycle, and this is I got this from Mixamo. I just uploaded my T-pose of my character to Mixamo and downloaded a bunch of different animation clips, and this is the one that worked for this particular scene. But the problem with Mixamo here is that I don't have access to animating this character now. Like, I could speed up the walk cycle, but that's not what I wanted to do. Excuse me. So what do we do? So enter the C4D character rig. So first we're going to disable the Mixamo animation, and I'm going to go to my character tag here and say reset bind pose. So now we're back to our T-pose, which is what I uploaded to Mixamo to get that walk cycle. And let's grab our character rig. So under character, character. All right. And there's a template here for the Mixamo control rig. So we need to create that. So we do that by creating a root, and then a pelvis, and then Command-Shift clicking on arm and leg to create 2 of each. And then I'm going to select both arms and create the hand. Great, but now nothing matches up. Fortunately, there is this little button here called Adjust, and that, oddly enough, adjusts everything to be in place. A couple more clicks though. We need to go to Animate, and under Retarget Master, we need to retarget all. And then in Weight Transfer, we just need to grab our geometry here. Oh, get back there. Where to animate? How did I lose that? 1 second here. Weight transfer. There we go. And grab our geometry for our character and transfer the weights. Okay. And now let's. Oh, there we are. And now we can re-enable the animation. And let's hide our original Mixamo skeleton. So now we've got a control rig that follows our Mixamo skeleton exactly. But what this lets us do now is edit this animation within reason. Basically, it's adding layers of animation on top of what Mixamo has already done. So we can do things like, I'm going to grab his torso. I'm going to give him this very comfortable looking squat. I'm going to grab his head, and I'm going to give him a little look to the left there. I'm going to grab his arm and give him a little shoulder shrug. Grab this one, do the same thing. We can even grab his elbow here, and let's scooch that in a little bit, maybe rotate his wrist. But now we've got this very comfortable looking walk cycle that is completely usable in any project. No, but that's really how, that's all I did for editing the animation of our heroes here. Let me turn off my fire again so this will play. So yeah, I wanted this, movie star walking away from the explosion kind of thing in slow motion, and it's just, they're simple walk cycles, and I just gave them some head rotation, moved their arms around a little bit, and called it a day. Again, not a character animator, but I can play one in 3D here, so cool. All right, we've got some time left, and actually we'll do something a little different here. So we'll go back to some choose your own adventure here. Because we have a little time, we can either look at some more comping for the flames, more than happy to do that, or we can look at some of the Cinema 4D stuff for either the destruction on the bottom left or the head opening on the top right. So show of hands, who wants to see some of the head opening rig stuff? Anyone? Show of hands. All right, got a couple there. And then how about some of the destruction here? Destruction, okay, we got more people for destruction. Okay, let's go back to our destruction here. Let's go over to Cinema 4D. All right, we can close up our theater. We can close up our very comfortable squatty walking guy. And let's open up our destruction scene. Actually, sorry, let me go back to our destruction here because that scene is very heavy, so I pre-rendered some of our play blasts for the destruction. And here we go. All right, so did a lot of R&D on trying to figure out how to make that destruction work. Started off with some X particles, doing some recursive shattering. That wasn't exactly what I was looking for. So then I jumped over to just playing with the Voronoi fracture. And I had a very specific idea of having this slow motion crumbling, having the camera pan down from the head of our statue, and then just following it down and it's just to complete chaos. So I needed to figure out a way to do some sort of progressive shattering using these little detonators and having the camera follow that. So here's the actual final simulation that I came up with, and you can see my camera move there. One of my favorite things is the face that comes down in the end of the shot that just sort of drifts down on the frame, which actually happened in one of the simulations, but I couldn't duplicate it, so I ended up just cheating it on well. So you'll see it in the final shot. It'll just pop on right there. So yeah, so this is just the layer of Voronoi fracture. And once I've combined that with, like, I've got some particle sims in there that are cloning geometry of like little wood sprinters. So let's let this play through, and then it'll go through the steps of the shots here. And there's my little face that pops back on. So yeah, this is the final shot with the destruction. This is just the Voronoi fracture, and then I have a pass of particles, and I've cloned on little wood splinters to these particles. And I didn't bother with collisions on these or anything, just because there was so much activity in this scene. So when I combine those all, and then I combine it with some VBDs for some smoke and some pyro, it just really came to life, and there was complete chaos, which was super fun. So again, with my principle of trying to figure things out as simply as possible, we're going to do a simple Voronoi fracture with this sort of progressive crumbling that I came up with. So let's figure out how to do that. So first, we're going to need a floor. So here's our floor, and I'm going to put a collider tag on there, simulation tags collider. And let's grab a placeholder statue. So this is our placeholder statue. I want to make it tall. And the Voronoi fracture, super fun to play with, so let's just put one of those in. And as soon as we put our cylinder in there, boom, we've got instant fractures. But I'm going to make this a little more interesting. Let's go to my sources. I'm going to bump up the points to 200. And that's the amount of fractures that's going to take place in there. So, but I'm going to change these from uniform to exponential. So this is going to put smaller fragments on the left and larger fragments on the right. So just something that's a little more interesting. So right away, we've got our fracturing. And I'm going to actually turn off colorize fragments so that we're not distracted. And to make this dynamic, you just put a dynamics tag, simulation tags rigid body, on the Voronoi fracture. And right away, we get free animation. So boom, that just collapses right away. Because there's a couple things going on. On our dynamics here, it's set to trigger immediately. Well, I want to change this to velocity peak. So that means it's only going to enable that dynamics when we have some motion in our pieces here. So I can play this, and it's not going to do anything until we have some motion in our scene there. And we're going to do that with the plane effector. So for now, I'm just going to unenable our dynamics. and I'm going to add a plane effector to our Voronoi fracture. And that's the cool thing about the fracture object, is that it is a MoGraph object, so it's subject to all of the MoGraph effectors. And I'm just going to add in a rotation of 10 degrees on all axes. So we've rotated all of our pieces here now 10 degrees. And because I want this fracturing to take place all at one, but kind of start in certain places and then sort of progressively keep fracturing, I'm going to use some spherical fields as little detonators, as I call them. So let's create a spherical field, which is right here. And you can see our spherical field is coloring where the affecting is happening. So because we had our plane selector selected, and we have our spherical field in there, that's going to affect that. Great. So I'm actually going to keyframe this effector, or the spherical field. So at the beginning, I'm going to set it to 0, put a keyframe in there, and then at like frame 30, I am going to set it to 150 centimeters and keyframe that. So you can see here, our spherical field will animate, and it will introduce that motion into our Voronoi fracture, and then it will trigger the dynamics. So let's just turn off the color remap so we don't get distracted. And now if we re-enable our dynamics, you'll see it will, again, we have our little detonator. It'll activate that motion, which will then activate the dynamics. So here we go. And you can see it's only activated the ones that have that motion in there. So I'm going to go ahead and add in another spherical field. We can just drag and copy that. We have to add that back in and set it to add, because we want all of these fields to add up. And let me just move this one up here. And I'm going to move this one back a little bit. So now we have two fields that are our little detonators. And what's cool about that is that now we can offset that so that the middle one happens first and the second one happens second. So now we've got two little detonators. So yeah, obviously we need some more fine tuning to make sure we don't have pieces hanging in the air, but that is in essence how I art directed the destruction of that statue. So, boom, all right. And then once I got the simulation to a place that I was happy with it, I then went in and bumped my Voronoi fracture way up. So like instead of like 200, I go to like 400 or 500. I'm not going to do that today because I don't want to crash. But yeah, that is the way. Oh, one other thing in here is that if you wanted a little more explosive energy, I'm going to go back to my Voronoi fracture and add in a push apart. So this is instantly, oddly enough, pushing everything apart. That's a little too harsh though, so I'm going to go to the effector and change that to 15 centimeters. So now this is just pushing all of my bits apart by that much. And I'm actually going to use our same spherical fields to manipulate our push apart effector. So I'm going to add field in there, 1, and field in there, 2, and set that to add once again. So now both of those effectors, the plane and the push apart, are going to be enabled by those spherical fields, and we'll get a little more explosive motion as the dynamics happen. So you can see now those are sort of exploding out. So that is the overall basic principle of how that destruction was happening. So, all right, we are just about out of time. So I apologize if we weren't able to get to the section you wanted to see, but I'll be hanging out over here for the next hour. So if you have any questions or you want to see one of these scenes more in detail, super happy to do that for you. Yeah, we already got to the fiery furnace. We don't need to see that again. So we need to go here. All right, so yes, thank you, Maxon, for having me out once again. I love being able to share a little bit of my process because I've gotten so much out of these talks over the years myself. So yes, Thank you so much. So you can keep in touch at botched.com anytime. You got all my stuff there. So yeah, thank you for sticking around to the end. Thank you for doing that. And definitely stick around for more because we have even more presenters. So yeah, that is it for me. Thanks again.